everybody. I hope you're all well today. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thank you to everybody calls. Just had this show here with Oakland McCulloch today, where we're going to talk a little bit about success strategy, leadership, and everything else we can get out of him here today. Oakland, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. Happy birthday and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Hey, thank you very much. Hopefully the Irish are watching us here today. I'm excited to talk to you. Don't know if my comments are working. LinkedIn's been a little bit messed up with my comments and stuff, so I'm trying.
So did they dye the river green again this year?
I don't know what they're doing, honestly. Like I
had heard that they weren't going to be allowed to do it anymore because of environmental concerns or whatever. But
no, I don't know. I don't know what's going on today. StreamYard is not liking me, sir. So I'm not actually seeing the chat. I'm not seeing if we're going live here or what the deal is. So I'm going to pop on the LinkedIn here for a second. See if
okay.
Apparently we're talking.
Yeah, I can see you and I can hear you.
So how's the weather treating you today? Oh, you know what? I'm actually just now seeing it.
Good.
Wonder what's with the delays here lately.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all of my social media has been kind of slow lately. I don't know.
I had a copy of your book here, Oakland, and I apologize because I don't know what I did with here in the last couple of seconds. But Oakland here actually has a book. I'm going to do a share screen here. And Oakland, this is actually how we met. You were talking to somebody else on one of their podcasts about your book, and I believe I'd sent you a message actually.
You did
with you, and I was saying I was going to buy your book, and we kind of went from there, right?
Yeah, that's how it all started, and I'm glad you did. I'm glad we got connected.
And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to get you on the Service Professionals Network. You joined my site. Hopefully, you met a few people from there. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. So he is actually showing us that my LinkedIn comments are in fact working.
Oh, good.
Phil here, he is another member of the Service Professionals Network. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Yeah, and I'm glad I'm on your network there, and I have met some people, and I've connected with some people and talked not only over the network, but we've actually made a couple phone calls and talked to people. So.
Brendan Brady here actually was a recent guest on our show. He said he bought your book and he thought it was an amazing read. Actually, I did too. You've been doing the rounds. It is a fantastic book. I definitely don't want to sell the book short by any means. You can definitely go to my website, click the link. It's an affiliate link. Obviously, we'll both make a little bit of money if somebody actually buys the book. Definitely, it's inspired me to actually, have the second conversation with you now, because you were on with Sia and Mike Ashburn there a little while ago. I'll place the link to that conversation here in the comments. I believe you're having a conversation here on April 6th, you said, with Sia?
Yeah, on April 6th, I'll be on Sia's podcast as well on her show. And I'm really looking forward to that because I enjoyed our show with you, me, her, and Mike. I mean, that was a fantastic show. I really did enjoy it.
I'm really excited to see what she has to ask you about that on that show. She does a really good job interviewing. And I'm always glad that you guys are on here. But, today I wanted to ask you a few different questions about leadership that maybe you're not talking about in regards, to your background. You've been in, the Army for 23 years, correct?
23 years, that's right.
And you were a leader of men, women, everybody else. You want to tell us a little bit about your leadership, background for those of us that aren't familiar with you or haven't bought the book yet?
Yeah. So I've been a leader in some way or another for about 40 years now. So I was always a captain of my sports teams in high school and junior high. And I was student government president, class president, those kinds of things. And then as a cadet, both at West Point, I did 2 years at United States Military Academy at West Point, and 2 years in ROTC. And during that time, I was, I had leadership positions in ROTC. And then I got commissioned into the Army as a second lieutenant, and I had a couple I had 4 platoon leader positions where I was in charge of 30 to 35 men in the infantry platoons, and then switched over to armor, and I was an armor company commander. I had 2 commands. I had one command that was about 150 people, and the other one was 375 people in my company that I was in charge of.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that was an interesting command. It really was. And I always tell people, I had 375 people in my command. I had a $10 million budget, and I was signed for $252 million worth of equipment, and I was 30 years old.
Okay, so that brings a lot of questions to my mind, right? Like,
Yeah.
You're 32 years old, you're in charge of 375 people. So first thing I want to know is, like, did you know all those people? Did you make it, like, were you familiar with them at least on like a face basis? Or
yeah, so when I took over, obviously I knew almost none of them. I did know a couple, but I made it I made an effort. I made it my job to get to know as many of them personally as I could. And I think that's part, if you're a good leader, because leadership is about people. I mean, everything else, you throw everything out, as long as you understand that leadership is about people and you take care of people, and they know you're taking care of them and they believe you're taking care of them, then you can do just about anything and you can lead anybody and anything. And so I made it an effort, and I would do PT, physical training. We did it every morning from 6 in the morning till 6 to 7 in the morning. And I would go around to each of my units, because I had a air defense artillery platoon. I had a medical platoon. I had a signal platoon. I had a bunch of different platoons. And every morning I did it PT with a different.
So it's not just a bunch of grunts. I mean, this is like, you have a full division ready to go.
Yeah, it was for a separate armor brigade. So I had a lot of components in there that when we were supposed to go to the field, we would dish them out to all the other units, all the other people. So it was an interesting command. It really was. But that's how I did it. Was I just went around in the mornings and did PT, and then I would have meetings where I would just go to the platoon meeting and just sit in on the meeting and just kind of get to know people. I owned the largest dining facility on post, so I hosted people. We'd have lunches.
So you're doing everything from events to going to preparing people for war, right?
Right.
I could ask you a lot of questions, right, about like your first day, how you got started with leadership, right? But I want to kind of get like a little bit more into the meat and potatoes about what's going on in a little bit of today's world, right? And I wanted to see a little bit about how you would go about things, right? But to set the stage, right? I wanted to, I've read your book, I know a little bit about you, but again, for everybody else, right? Like, have you been to war? Have you led people in war? Like, is there something about your experience, right, that can explain to people why I'm asking these questions?
Yeah, so I was in the first Gulf War, 1990-91, and then I was involved in Bosnia. I wasn't actually day-to-day in Bosnia. I was congressional liaison officer for General Clark, General Wesley Clark, in Germany.
No,
and then I was
up there.
Yeah, he amazing man. It really was. And then I was the operations officer. So I ran the day-to-day operations of an armor battalion in Kosovo for 9 months. And that was really interesting. It really was.
Okay, so I mean, so you have experience, right, with these different situations.
Right.
I don't want to paint you into a corner too much about political, whatever, right? With the situation that's going on with Ukraine, right? There's obviously 3 or 4 different leaders on different opposing sides, right? Is there any examples of good leadership, bad leadership that you could take away, or perhaps give us some insight on? Like, what are you noticing?
Yeah, and I don't obviously know much more than anybody else who's watching the news. But I think here's what I tell people all the time when people ask me about what's going on there. I said, for I'm a history major. I have a bachelor's in history. I have a master's in history, and I always tell people bad things have happened not because people wanted bad things to happen, but because people made silly mistakes and made silly decisions that got out of hand. And we got to be very careful that people are thinking about the decisions they're making. And we just kind of made a comment when you and I were talking. I kind of talked about it's amazing when you paint somebody into a corner or you make it so that they have no choices other than fight. They're going to fight, and so we got to be really careful that what we do in this situation, because this could get out of hand very quickly. And so I think what we have to do is everybody needs to remain calm as possible, and we got to make some decisions using calm heads instead of just out of the gut make a decision that we think is right and we haven't really thought through the second and third order effects that could happen from a decision.
I think you brought up a great point, obviously, with the fact that none of us know all the reasons why people are making the decisions that they're making, right?
That is right.
And another great point that I thought you made there too is that when you paint people or push people in a corner, they're going to fight, right? And a lot of bad things happen because silly decisions were made, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
And, here's the thing, right? Decisions were made. Okay, we're at where we're at this point, right? And that includes Russia, Ukraine, everybody else, right? At what point, right, would you advise any of these people, like if you were giving critiques, like let's say you're on the leadership team of Zelensky, right? We'll start with the Ukrainians first, right? Is there anything that you would suggest to him to do differently from a leadership standpoint, publicly, from what you know?
So I would say that the key here, because no matter what the reason that this started, and I think there are plenty of reasons why this started on both sides, the Russian and the Ukrainians. No matter why it started, there are innocent Ukrainian people dying. There's no doubt about that. Nobody can dispute that. So I think if you're the president of the Ukraine, your goal has to be to put an end to this as soon as possible. So I think we got to, if I was him, I would be doing everything I can, not necessarily to give everything away, but you got to get to the negotiating table to put an end to this. I mean, one way or another, that's got to be the goal, is to stop the fighting that's going on in and around the major cities that are causing the casualties.
Now, again, put you on a spot a little bit. Do you think he's done a good job of trying to do that?
I don't know. I know I just saw a headline. I didn't get a chance to read it this morning, that they have started the fourth round of talks, and they're saying that they're actually making some progress. So I hope that that's what they're doing, and that they're gonna figure it out and put an end to it, do a ceasefire and figure it out from there. Because again, once the fighting stops, then we can start thinking it with a little bit clearer heads. It's not emotional at that point, or as emotional, and we can stop doing things out of a reflex or out of a gut feeling, and we can say, okay, here's the situation now. Let's see how we put a permanent end to this.
You're obviously very calm, level-headed, and you think very much strategically, right? And we're both getting a little bit older, and I'm a pretty self-reflective person, right? So I'm always thinking about how much more calm I am, and people think I'm nuts now, right? And sometimes I am, right? What I'm kind of curious about is how much has your perception on that changed from since when you were younger?
Yeah, well, I think I was always I mean, we all make stupid decisions and do stupid things as a youth. I always say it's amazing I'm still alive. Some of the dumb things I did as a youth, but I think when it came to being in a leadership position, I tried to always take a step back and think about what I was going to do, and a lot of that came from my father used to tell me that. Before you make a decision, And this was for growing up, but I kind of use it in the professional world as well. Growing up, he'd always say, before you make a decision, think about this to decide whether or not it's a good decision or not. Would you want your mom to know that you were going to do what you think you're about to do?
Ooh.
And if the answer is yes, then you're okay. If the answer is no, then you probably don't want to do that. So, in my professional world, I didn't use that necessarily. That was my mom, but I said, would I want my boss to know I was going to do this, or would I want somebody else to know that I was about to do this? And sometimes I would bounce it off my wife. I was always lucky. I had what Napoleon's corporal, and I think everybody that's watching probably knows who Napoleon was. But Napoleon, when he was fighting a battle, he would be up on his big white horse directing the battle, and he'd always have a low-ranking soldier, a corporal, standing right next to him. And before he put out orders, he'd give it to this corporal, and he'd say, "Tell me what I just told you to do in your own words." And if the corporal could do that, then it was a good order. He sent it out. If the corporal couldn't, he figured it wasn't a good order. Well, I always used my wife that way. I'd come home and I'd say, "Hun, you know what I'm about to do?" And I'd tell her, and she'd look at me and say, "Really? You're really going to do that?" I said, "Well, I thought I was, but maybe not."
Well, that's really awesome. That right there, no matter how much I stumble through this conversation and have technical difficulties, to me that makes my whole day. Right, just a little bit about Napoleon, because seeking the feedback, and the key point there, right, that I want people to understand is that he asked the corporal to explain what he heard.
That's right.
Like, what you say, but do you know what the other person's hearing? Do you feel like people in leadership positions, on average, I don't want to speak for everybody, right? Do you think that we could do a better or worse job of doing that?
Oh, we have to do a better job of two things. When you communicate with people, it has to be concise, succinct, and easily understood. Because if it's not, it will be misunderstood, just like the old adage says. So you have to do that. The other piece of that is that we're not good listeners. So unless you have to work on both of those. But I'll tell you the thing, and I've done this, and I'm sure everybody has done this who's been in a leadership position. I would ask my guys and gals, I'd say, "Okay, this is what I want," and I'd give them the resources to do whatever I had to do. And about 3 weeks later, they'd come back with the product, and they'd say, "Here you go, boss." And I'd look at it and say, "That's not what I asked for." And they said, "Oh, yeah, it is." And you know what? Looking back, you look at it, and that is exactly what I asked for. It's not what I wanted, but that's exactly what I asked for. So you got to make sure that when you're communicating with people, that you tell them in a very succinct, concise manner what it is you want, and then have them tell you what it is you are asking for. And if you do that, you'll keep from being in that situation that I found myself in a few times.
I was smiling there, not at your misfortune or your story, right? Because you reminded me, I'm sure a lot of people that will eventually listen to this, you reminded, I'm sure, a lot of people about all the things that have happened in our lives that we could have avoided if we just verified what was heard on the other side before.
Absolutely.
Right? And so if people really, in all types of leadership positions, right? And I was probably in my mid 30s before I started seeing the cards, that people would hang on doors, like the suggestion boxes, like, what have you heard, or what's the feedback, right?
Right.
And, a lot of people think that a leadership is defined by someone taking charge, right? And, it's my way or their highway. Here's our goal. This is how
That's horrible.
And you've been on 30 something different podcasts recently, right? So you dealt with the question about, you're just an army leader, right? What's the difference? And one thing I would probably say is, like, I don't know if I ever really hashed out why I wouldn't be good in the army, or why I didn't feel like joining the army, right? Is because I'm really, I grew up in a very traumatic household, right? Lots of issues, right? And at one point, people were suggesting that I write a book about it, because I used to share my story a lot, right? And I almost wrote the book. It was going to be called "Breaking the Chains That Bind Us," right?
Right.
Because
that's a great title.
I might write it someday, right? And watching some of the interviews I had with other people, right? Breaking the chains that bind us. You reminded me of that book, and I haven't even thought about writing that book in years, because I quit talking about those stories, right? I don't know if I healed or I just decided I don't want to share them anymore, but I just don't really talk about my trauma too much, right? And you don't have to have massive amounts of trauma to have chains or traumatic effects or you know symptoms that you remember it, like triggers, right? Like if you're triggered by something, it's because it reminds you of something bad that happened, right?
Or good.
Or good, yeah, right. So when you talk about leadership legacy, right? I read your whole book, and I feel like I'm not the dumbest guy in the room, right? But I read your whole book, and I had to watch a couple podcasts before I felt like I really understood the title, right? Could
Right.
you maybe explain the title to people, like what legacy of leadership actually means to you, both in the army and out of?
Right. Yeah. So the point you make about, I do get people who say, Colonel McCulloch, you know leadership in the army, but you don't know how to lead people outside the army. And I just laugh at them. I said, are you kidding me? I said, again, leadership is about people. It doesn't matter where you learned it. Doesn't matter where you practiced it. If you know how to lead people, you can lead any organization. And I prove that. I did 23 years in the army, did pretty successful, retired a lieutenant colonel, ran a food bank. When I retired, I ran a food bank for 18 months. Knew nothing about a food bank when I took over as running the day-to-day operations of that. But when I took over, we were handing out about 1.2 million pounds of food. When I gave it up 18 months later, we were handing out 3.8 million pounds of food. Leadership is leadership. So I don't buy that piece of it. So the book title, Your Leadership Legacy, because I do believe, as I say in the book, I say in my presentations, I say every chance I get, it's our duty as current leaders to train the next generation of leaders. And we're going to get what we produce. If we don't do a good job, then we're going to pay the price down the road, because this next generation is going to take over at some point. At some point, old guys like me are going to turn around and say, here you go. I hope you do a better job at it than we did. So I think, in the end, that is our responsibility to do that. And you got to do it in a number of different ways. But one of the ways is to be a mentor to people. And I think you got to be willing to pass along those key lessons learned and nuggets of just good information and good ways of doing things, so that the next generation can build on that.
Very, very true. And I was watching one of these podcasts, and it was with a gentleman from India. How do you say his name?
Prashant?
Prashant, right? And you were talking about when you're in the military and you're in a leadership position, right? And you are talking to the next wave of leaders. You're actually changing the way the whole military is ran for the next 20 years.
Yeah. You can influence it, and it doesn't have to just be the military. It can be any organization. I don't care if you're the president of a construction company, a large construction company. The leaders that you're producing to take over and be the leaders in your company, you could be affecting that for the next 20 years if those people stay in your organization for that long. But even if they don't stay in your organization, they stay in the field, they may go to another company, you're affecting the leadership of that profession for the next 20, 30 years. So you got to take it seriously. And the quote that is my favorite quote of all time, and I love quotes. And if you read my book, I got all kinds of quotes in my book.
I think that's why I read your book 5 times.
but the quote that really sticks out to me is the one that Master Sergeant David Powell, who worked for me, and I say he worked for me, I'm here to tell you he was as good a leader, if not better, than I am or ever was. But he and I were talking one day when I was running the ROTC program at the University of South Alabama. So we were producing lieutenants, future leaders in the United States Army. And he said to me, he said, boss, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. And I thought, I wish I could take credit for that quote, but I can't. That was Master Sergeant David Powell. And I said,
I mean, if you think about how powerful that is. Though.
It is so powerful. And the reason it's powerful, not only is it true, but the real power of that is you can take that word nations and you can substitute company, university, hospital, sports team, whatever you want. And it doesn't change the meaning or the power of that that quote one bit. So it isn't just nations, it's
Well,
anything, because leadership is so important to every organization. I don't care what it is.
SPN, right? You know, first of all, I didn't do a really good job of telling everybody who I am. I just assumed that, and whenever you're doing a podcast or a streaming event, Sia would get mad at me if I called this a podcast because it's not a podcast; it's a live stream. So sorry, Sia, I'm not claiming to be a podcaster.
Yeah, well, you don't want to see a mad at you.
Well, like I said, Service Professionals Network definitely don't want to see that. It's just the thought of that sidetracked me. ServiceProfessionalsNetwork.com, right? I originally started that as a networking group on LinkedIn just to raise money for an orphanage in Guinea. Okay, that I'm no longer raising money for, right? But it was founded around the golden rule because in 2015 or 16 when I started SPN, it was part of another networking group called Connect Suggestions, right? And there was 8 other branches, and all these other LinkedIn networking groups were focusing on sales and business and everything else, right? And like we were talking earlier, you don't have to talk about your book to sell your book. You just have to show people that you're a good guy and explain to them, this is why I'm somebody you might want to read about.
Yeah.
Right? Well, with service professional, I'm like, I'll do your networking thing, but I want to focus on the golden rule, right? And then I started realizing that some people really responded to that, right? And I started thinking about, if I keep this focus, I can maybe turn it into a business. But my thing is, I can maybe impact the world enough to get a lot more people talking about the golden rule, right?
Right.
So when you start, I read your book later, the title's awesome. You know what I mean? But I started thinking about the legacy, right? Take those 375 people during that one command. Okay, if you think about this, right? How many of them survived? How many have kids? How many of them had multiple kids? Right? You influence those 375 people. You also influence their spouses. Right. You influence their kids, their cousins, everybody that comes in contact with that person for the rest of the time. You've influenced them. It's the same thing with networking or any other organization, right? So if you're a CEO of a major organization like Elon Musk, right? The guy's rich as hell. And a lot of people pay attention to him because he's rich as hell, right? But if you think about it from a business standpoint, he's feeding a lot of people just with his business, right? Obviously they work for their money, right? But he's influencing just those people that work for him, regardless of the fact that he's Elon Musk and he's a celebrity, just because of the size of his business, right? And I don't think that a lot of people really understand the power that we all carry in our day-to-day lives.
Oh,
whether
absolutely.
We're in that leadership role or we're not, right?
Yeah, well, and absolutely, Mike. And I always tell people, look, and I think everybody needs to follow this, absolutely, but leaders specifically need to follow this. You must do what's right. You got to do the right thing, not because somebody's going to check on you, not because of any other reason other than it's the right thing to do. And we got to get back to doing that. And leaders especially have to do that, because if somebody who works for you ever catches you not doing the right thing, you're done. That trust is so powerful and so important that you got to do what's right. And the trust is so important. Just like Vince Lombardi said, a team is not a group of people who play together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. And if your team, the people who work for you and your organization don't trust you, you're done. The organization's done. You got to do what's right. And if we get back to doing that, not just leaders, but everybody, this world will be a better place than it is. Absolutely.
Well, it's funny. It's because, okay, you're like, if we get back to doing that, right? So we can both agree that there's an issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's an issue.
A lot of people will agree that there's issues, okay? And, I definitely don't want to act like I'm a pariah or get on my, soapbox and act like I'm a self-righteous person, because I don't always do the right thing too. I certainly try to apologize or own up to the bad things I do.
Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. Even though I try to convince my wife of that, she's not buying it, even after 35 years. So
if you haven't made that winning argument yet, right?
Yeah.
There's no point. Well, okay, so we all make mistakes, right? And we all seek grace, and we all hope to give or get the grace that we hope to receive, right?
Absolutely.
How do you suggest if somebody in a leadership position, right, is sitting there thinking to themselves, wow, these guys are making great points, right? How do you go about changing the way that you affect how do you go about changing your leadership style? Like, is it something you can just do in a day, or is it something that takes a long conscious effort?
No, I think it does take a long time. I think that you can start down that road if you want to change your style. But through my years of experience, it's tough. Once somebody gets established doing something a certain way, we are all creatures of habit, and it's hard to change habits. It really is. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but
Why do we keep voting the same people in then?
yeah. Well, that's another
I had to ask.
another show that we can talk about. But we got to get back to producing people. Here's what I believe, and at every level, in every type of organization, whether it's military, politics, business, whatever you want to talk about, we got to get back to producing leaders who understand it's not about them. That is about the people in their organization or their government or the country or whatever, and it's about the organization that they lead. And if we get back to producing people who understand it's about selfless service, it is not about them, that it's about how they treat the people in their organization to make them the best they can be. Because people say, well, how do you get what you want? How do you get promoted and get a nicer job and all that stuff if you're not worried about yourself? And I say, if you take care of the people who work for you and you make them the best they can be, then they'll take care of the organization, which then means you're going to get, in the end, you'll get your glory, that your organization did well. But you did it by making everybody else better than what they were and taking care of them. And if we get back to doing that, then we'll get back to doing great things in this country. Because another one of my favorite quotes that I believe 100% is that America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And I believe that 100%.
Who said that one?
Alex de Tocqueville, a Frenchman.
Oh, so sorry, that's
back in the 1800s.
That's a great point, though, right? And it's kind of like a statement you made on another podcast, right? About just seeing the kid on the soccer field, right? Nobody told that kid to be a leader. That kid just was.
Yeah.
Right? Do you feel like life beats that out of these kids, or how do you identify that kid as an adult coming into your corporation or into the Army? Like, how do you identify a good leader?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One, I think, it's, and I kind of get to do some of that when I'm recruiting for the Army ROTC program. I see young men and women coming in that tell me they want to be an officer, they want to be a leader, and I can kind of judge, through my interaction on where I think they are in that process. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't get them there, because that's our job, is to train them. Because I do believe that you do have those natural born leaders. There are people like that out there. We've all seen them. Mm-hmm. Like I said, you go out there to a bunch of 10-year-olds playing soccer. Nobody's had leadership training, but you can pick out who the leader is on that team. And it may not even be the captain. Doesn't necessarily have to be the captain who they're following. So there are those type of people, but you can train people to be leaders. And so there are certain traits that I think are so important. Number one, I think you got to be a people person if you really want to be a great leader. Number two, you got to have good communication skills. And number three is that you got to be willing to put yourself out there and set the example for people. And because that's huge in an organization. How else do you affect people on a day-to-day basis except you set the example? This is what I want, because the leader is trying to set that culture. And the easiest way to set the culture is to live the culture you want everybody else to follow. If you do that,
that's the hardest part for a lot of us.
It is very hard.
I never actually did tell you why I didn't think I'd be good in the Army. I guess I checked myself on that one too, right? I have a big problem with authority, being told what to do, how to do it. And a big part of that, trauma and whatnot, is the fear of having a bad leader.
Yeah.
Right?
And we all have them. I could tell you, Mike, I mean, in all my years in the Army, I had great leaders who I would follow anywhere and do anything they asked me to do. And I had leaders that I did what I was supposed to do and nothing more. I mean, because I just couldn't. I mean, I didn't agree with what they were doing. I didn't agree with how they did things. And it was tough. It really was. And so I tell people, you're going to get both of those. And You just got to understand that you're going to get both of them, and you got to make it through. When you get that person that you as a leader, the middle leader, so your boss is one of those people who doesn't do the right things.
You're the
boss. Set the example. Doesn't care about the people in their organization. And I've had leaders like that. Then you as the middle leader your job at that point, you're not going to change that guy or gal. I mean, let's be honest, they're the leader. You're probably not going to change them. Although that doesn't mean you shouldn't try by subtly making suggestions here and there. But your job really then at that point is to shield the people who work for you from all the toxic stuff that's coming out of the person above you. You do that as much as possible. You're not going to shield them from all of it, but you got to shield them from as much of it as you can.
I bet you've earned a lot of long lifetime friendships outside the Army just by doing that naturally.
You do. Absolutely. There's people that I knew as a lieutenant that I still keep in touch with, and they left the Army a long time ago. They didn't make a career out of it like I did, but we still kind of keep in touch. Send email messages every once in a while, or make a phone call every once in a while, or things like that.
One of the things that you said there, right, about doing what you have to do and nothing else, right? So when people, I can only imagine the many thoughts that go through your head when somebody's like, "Oh, you were just a leader in the Army," right? What does that entail, right? What people don't realize is anybody who asks that question doesn't realize is that you made it pretty high up there, right? Like how many more rungs up the ladder is there for somebody that enlisted?
Well, I retired a lieutenant colonel, so the next level is a colonel, and then the 4 generals. So out of I made it to 05, and there's 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 levels, so I was about halfway. But what people don't understand is as you get higher up, there are fewer and fewer people get promoted. So
yeah.
So I mean, my son said one day, he said, "Dad, I realized where you were in the Army when we were on a post, and there were only 5 other people on the post that had your rank."
Well, see, that's the thing, right? So people are like, what do you know about being a leader? Because you're just in the Army, right? They don't think about the competition, right? About the cream rises to the crop, right? So, and not only that, but like people see the results, right? Especially in the Army where they're just watching everything, they see the data, right? So like eventually if you're a good leader, they're gonna, the data might not tell you why you're getting the good results or why you're a good leader, right? Like, so if you have the general above you that's just doing a really good job because you have a bunch of lieutenant colonels that are doing a really good job, right? That guy gets a little bit of extra shine about that, right? But you still have to figure out a way to motivate your troops underneath you to stand up to get to that high point, right? So how do you say that in a way to make people understand that quickly, right? Because like, I think the whole problem with leadership in this country and world, right, is the difference in perceptions and communications, right? And one of the things that you do better than most people that I've seen is that you have a really good communication style, right? So where would I go to learn like how to be a better communicator, the way that you listen, and like is there a place that you can send people?
So I believe that communication is a skill just like any other skill. It's like riding a bike. It's like whatever, playing a sport. You can get better at it, but to get better at it, you got to practice at it. And you can't be afraid to get up in front of people and talk, or you can't be afraid to try to throw, to write better. And the way you write better, in my opinion, is, and I did this when I've been a boss, when I was the leader of the ROTC program. I had somebody who just could not write. I mean, horrible writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, here's the rule. You cannot send anything outside this organization that you don't let somebody else read first. And it was just that simple. I mean, the things he was talking about were spot on. He just didn't know how to put it in writing so that other people could appreciate it. So either I would look at it, or another soldier in our unit would look at it before we allow him to send it out, and then we'd kind of critique it, and they'd make changes. But if you get out there and you practice your communication, and it's so powerful, communication of all types, whether it's speaking, verbal, nonverbal, written. And when I say written, I mean writing letters, memos, books, whatever, and also texts and email messages. And then the major piece, which we talked about earlier, was listening, which we don't do well as leaders or as people anymore in this country for sure, and probably the world. We got to get back to being better listeners. But it all comes down to practice. You can get better at it if you really want to.
You know, it's awesome because we're getting little nuggets here, right? So basically, what I'm taking away from this, right, is that the communication is communication, no matter where it's at, whether
Absolutely,
it's wherever it's whether it's verbal, right, and it all
right.
comes better with practice, right. And I've actually had sales organizations where I told somebody, hey man, you probably don't want to send out this email until somebody else reads it. And that person wound up being probably one of the better salespersons when it came to sending messages after a while. That soldier, did he wind up or she wind up becoming a really good person with email after a while? Or
well, I only had them for about 18 months and then they moved on. So I'm not really sure. They got better at it because you will. I mean, if you hand it to somebody and every time they're telling you the same things or showing you a better way to do things, then if you want to get better at it, you can because you pay attention. And I don't send anything. If I'm going to send something out to somebody important, I take it home and I say, hey, here you go, hon, take a look at this. And then she gets out the red pen and it looks like somebody bled all over my paper by the time she gets done. But I will tell you, that makes a huge difference because I don't care how many times you read it. If you wrote it, I don't care how many times you read it, you're going to read what you were thinking. It's human nature. You don't see the mistakes. You don't see that it doesn't make sense because in your mind, it does make sense.
I've had I've had articles that have had 60,000, 100,000 likes, gone viral, what people say, right? So after a while, you get kind of cocky. You're like, oh, I can write anything. I'm really good at this, right? And I got out of the habit of having people read my stuff before I published it. And let me tell you, don't get cocky.
Yeah.
Like always practice the fundamentals. I mean, like it's good that you have her around. 35.
It is.
It
is. But you can pick anybody. It doesn't have to be your wife or But it just happens that my wife is very good at writing stuff and very good with the English language, much better than I am. Her vocabulary. She says I'm always looking up things she said because I don't want to admit I don't know it. So I'm pulling up my phone and checking what that means, So, but she's so much smarter than me. I don't know why she ever married me, but everybody has to have that person that you bounce ideas off of. You bounce your written communication off of, all those kinds of things. And going back to verbal communication, I'll tell you how I really got better at it was I've had jobs where I had to get up in front of people and give speeches and give lectures and all that. And I remember I was putting together this speech that I was going to give. We were talking about it. I was going to give it to 375 people at the Australian Command and Staff College. And so I put together this briefing that I was going to do. And I practiced it and I practiced it. I started by practicing in front of a mirror and I did it 2 or 3 times, 4 times. And then I brought my son and my daughter in and I sat them down and I did it a couple of times to them so I could see expressions on their face so I could at least look at somebody. And so, you just gotta repetition, just try to keep getting better and better every time you do it. But you have to practice it. If you don't practice, you're not going to get good at anything. I mean, that's just the way it is. You got those natural people out there. I got it. But most people aren't, and I wasn't either. I had to work at it.
That makes me feel good because you're somebody who comes off very affable, but you always seem very assured, right? And I don't want to take up too much of your time. I feel like I've already been having you talk here for a long period of time. But like your confidence, it's contagious, and the way that you treat people, it's contagious, right?
Absolutely.
And that's why I wanted you to have an opportunity to get back on here, not just to sell your book and stuff, right?
Right.
Because I wanted people to see this, right? The authentic part about it, right?
Well, I tell Mike, I tell people all the time, you got to be confident the term I always use, the phrase I always use, I said, if you don't think you're good, why should I think you're good? Now, there's a fine line between confidence and cocky. I got it, but I also tell people, if you're on that line, I'd rather have you be a little bit cocky than not confident, because if you're not confident, the people who are following you are going to pick that up, and that does nothing for the morale of your organization. That kills the morale of your organization if the people you work for don't believe that you're confident.
100%. Always. I appreciate you coming on here. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We just are now starting to see the comments and everything coming up today. So I don't know if it's me, my slow internet, or what.
Right.
But I appreciate you. You're always a great person to talk to. Definitely want to share the screen again and have people go take a look at your book here, because I tell you what, I read a lot of books, and I don't like to tell people that too much, because people are like, yeah, this guy doesn't read, right? But very few books do I actually read, and I feel like, man, I gotta connect with this author, because something about the way that he wrote this. I mean, come on. Usually, if I pick up a book, and I'm like, I do the same thing everybody else does. I pick up the book, open up a few pages. If I see 100 quotes in a row from somebody, I'm like, I'm not reading this book, right? I see a couple quotes in your book. I'm like, man, this guy's got a bunch of quotes in his book. But then I start reading it, and you're explaining why you chose those quotes and what they mean to you.
Right.
And let me tell you something. I've recommended a lot of books over my time, right? And people are not shy about telling me whether or not I recommended a good book or a bad book, right? And every person that has come back to me about your book has had nothing but positive reviews, right? And I think that's why you're on Sia's show and everybody else's show on my network. Everybody wants to get you on their network, right? Because you're an awesome guy. I think your book's fantastic. I think people should read it, especially if you're in a business or entrepreneur, not just if you're in the Army, right? But if you're starting a small business and you don't know how to communicate to people, or to get like the people to show up with a good attitude, ready to work, right? Because here's the thing. Everybody, whether you're in the Army or you're going to work, we all have stress. We all have things on our plate. We all have our good days and our bad days.
Absolutely.
Right? And the thing that I think that I like about what makes me like a book or not like a book is there actionable content. Is there something I can take away from this book and apply to my everyday life right as soon as I'm done reading it that will make my life better? If that happens, I will tell people confidently that is a good book, right? And what's funny is I can't find your book now that you're on my show. I'm looking around. I'm gonna find it in the bathroom. I swear. I'm gonna get up. But the thing I really like about your book, okay, is you can pick it up, open it up anywhere in between, read a page or two, and kind of get that daily reset, right? Like, it's okay, Oak's with me. I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird by saying.
Well, you know what, Mike? I tell people all the time that this book is not about leadership theory. There is no theory in this book whatsoever. This is about everyday things that everyday leaders can do at every level. I don't care if you're a brand new leader or if you've been a leader for 40 years. You can learn something or pick something up every day that is going to make you better. And and I really did write it for the young, aspiring leaders. But I also wrote it for people like me. And I've had people who have been leaders for 20, 30, 40 years who said, Oak, I read your book. You may have learned a couple new techniques, but really didn't learn a whole lot new from your book, because I've been doing all that for all along. But they said what I did figure out was, as I read something, I'd say, I used to do that really well, and I don't do that so well anymore. Maybe I need to dedicate some more time and get back to doing that. That helped me.
That's exactly what I'm saying, man. Right? Like, we all need those reminders. Like, it doesn't matter what skill it is, right? Like, I'm pretty good at jiu-jitsu, right? Like, I did 23 years of martial arts, right? So I can turn most people into a pretzel. But if I walked back onto the mat against my old self, right, it's not going to go well for Mike. I'm older, fatter, not in shape, right? I haven't been practicing my skills, right? What I like about your book, okay, and it was very evident in the first couple pages, was this dude is writing this book not just to tell, look at me, this is what you should do, this is my leadership tactics, buy my course, right? you're telling your story. This is where I started. This is how I started. This is where I went through. And one of the things I liked about the book, and I don't want to give away too much about it, is you brought up an example of when you did something that you knew would get you in trouble, but it was the right thing to do. And you talked a little bit about that earlier here in this conversation, right? But what I want, before I let you go and before I get off this show, right, I want people to understand that you live this. This is why we're having this conversation, right? Because there's something fantastic about a person, okay, that will do is right when they know there's great personal cost. I mean, yeah, you got up to lieutenant colonel, right? But you and I both know you maybe could have got a little bit higher, had you not
I
done
could
something.
have probably. There's a chance. I mean, you never know.
And you have my respect, man. You really, really do. And
well, I appreciate that, Mike. But again, we have to get back to producing people who know that they got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, even if it's not in their best interest. And there are times when that is the case, as I talk about in the book. There's times when it isn't in your best interest to do what's right, but you still got to do what's right. Because you got to, every morning, I can get up every morning. When I'm shaving, I can look at myself in the mirror and I know I did the right thing.
You also have to use a little bit of tact and pick to your battles, right?
Yeah, I sometimes wasn't as good at that.
I'm still not very good at it. I was in LinkedIn jail, for anybody who's still watching. I was in LinkedIn jail for like 4 or 5 days. And I'm not saying I did the right thing. I mean, I had the right stance. I didn't have the right response, right? And I definitely didn't use the right 4-letter words to tell the person how I view it. And it was a private message, but still, right? But my point, okay, is I'm really glad that I didn't have to explain to you, hey, I can't do this show. I'm in jail, right? So thanks for putting with all my nonsense too, by the way. But I guess my point is, I appreciate you putting up with all the things that is Michael Connor and all the things I bring to the table and seeing past the clown show and putting up with me, right? And being that infectious leader that you are, even outside the Army, man, you make me want to be a better person. And I just want to let you know that as somebody that puts himself out there, I deal with a lot of criticism and a lot of hate myself, right? And I'm sure you have as well, right? And I don't know, and I just wanted to point this out to you, that you've had a bigger impact than you probably even realize on people. You know what I mean? Just over the years, just by being who you are with thousands and thousands of people. And not just in the Army, but even when you're in the grocery store, just the way you talk to people. And I think that the world would be a worse place than it is now currently if there wasn't people like you out there. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And that really is my passion, is to make a difference in the lives of people, because I think that's what leaders do. You make a difference in the lives of people and in organizations. And if enough people do that, make a good difference, then the world will be a better place. And that's the whole goal of this.
Well, I tell you what, people like you inspire me to be a better person. So, like the next time you see me telling somebody off or getting linked in jail, just know it probably would have been worse if I didn't know you.
Thanks, Mike.
Anyway, guys, I appreciate everybody watching this. I am going to distribute it a little bit more on YouTube and everything else later. So please go subscribe to my channel. If you want to have a conversation with me or Oakland, connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm going to put his LinkedIn link in the description on YouTube. I'm also going to put his SPN link in there. Join the Service Professionals Network. Get your information out there. Be glad to introduce you to our network and have one of these conversations with you, if you're as interested as Oak here. Anyway, sir, I hope you have yourself a great day, and thanks for joining me on my birthday.
Thanks to you, Mike, and have the rest of your birthday, a good day.
I'm going to go have some green beer or something.
There you go.